What's up, everybody? This is Mattia, and today we're going to take a look at the 7 Hz Salnotes Zero. Now, these are a single dynamic driver IM priced at around $20. They're the direct competitor to the Moondrop 2, and I think, personally, that both of them redefine the price bracket they're in. Because at $20, there really wasn't anything before these. Yeah, you could go up and buy the Quarks, but they don't really compete in terms of technical performance or even tuning with either of the 2 and the 0. And none of the offerings under the $20 mark really punched up above their price range. These do, and they do especially so with the tuning. Both of them land towards neutralish, and objectively on a graph, they look extremely good. And the Zero is actually a step above the 2 in terms of tuning alone, because it just lowers the bass by 1 dB in the sub bass area, and it also lowers the 7K bump that the Chew has, that some people have issues with it because you have a bit too much brightness. They're kind of strident on some songs. These really don't have that issue. I will consider them neutral bright, but with a change of tips, they can transform into neutral warm, and we're going to get into it just a moment later. But for now, I will consider the 2 and the 0 extremely close to one another. In fact, they basically match from 20 hertz, aside from that 1 decibel difference in the sub bass, to 1K. And aside from that 7 hertz, 7K, 7 hertz, Jesus Christ, the 7K reduction in the 0, they really aren't all that different. But I wouldn't consider the 0 to be just an objective step above from the 2, because it just doesn't have that glare at 7K, which might cause some trouble for some people, that are sensitive to that range. But let's just start with the review. In terms of build quality, the cable is kind of decent. Surely it's a step above from the usual KZ or CCA cables, even the new ones. The terminal here is extremely thin, and I really, really like it because it's machined aluminum. Just look at how thin it is. Never really seen something like it. It looks just so cool. The only issue that I have with this cable, since it isn't plasticky, it isn't tacky, like it doesn't put any strain on my fingers when I pull on it. Like it doesn't have that glue sort of feeling, and it's light. It's decently built. The only issue that I have with it is these cheap and huge, massive ear hooks. Like, they're just so fucking stiff and so uncomfortable. I would recommend still swapping out the cable, even for how quality it is. Just for you out there that prefer, having their own custom cables, just go ahead and change it. And that's another point that the Zero has over the Chew, aside from the tuning. Because, like, as you can see, the angle is just a bit too aggressive. You have this sort of, like, almost those like a 270-degree angle, and it's too much for my ear. I wish it was something like this. It could maybe relieve some pressure from the back of the ear, but it doesn't. And the way that the cable is also positioned doesn't really help. I wish it was just a little bit higher, but structurally they couldn't really do it. Also, the Zero has this weird shape, as you can see. It's not your usual KZ build where you have everything rounded at the edge of the seams, but It has these two weird bumps here and there, which unfortunately, with also the addition of the kind of uncomfortable ear hooks, cause some severe comfort issues for me. And regarding that, the shoes are smaller, they're heavier because they're made out of aluminum, which is a plus in comparison to these, which are made out of, yeah, it's a sturdy plastic. It doesn't give off the sense that it's going to break anytime soon. But generally, I prefer the build and aesthetics of the shoe. They also look like they're smaller. They fit more securely into my ears, and especially with the spring tips that come included with the package, I just get a better fit and better comfort with the shoe. These, unfortunately, despite them being lighter, I have also tried them with different cables, but it's just the angularity of the shell that gives my ears that are unfortunately especially sensitive some trouble. And now let's just hop into the sound quality. Now, I've mentioned before that both the Chu and the Zero leaned towards neutral signature, and I'm going to split the tuning into bass, mid-range, and treble as usual. Now, bass is more controlled on the Zero. It has less thumpiness than the Chu, and it just lends itself to a slightly better sense of separation, but it has a slower and lower impact than the Moondrop Chew. The Moondrop Chew is faster, but it's blunted at the same time. It doesn't have that technical prowess that the Zero has in comparison. The Chew better suits EDM, electronic music, dubstep, etc., etc. And with that, I mean that the Zero is better for classical music or orchestral passages, while the Chew doesn't really need all that technical performance in the bass because it backs it up with the treble performance, which I think that it's slightly more detailed than the Zero, but the Zero just fares better in terms of bass, despite the quantity being slightly less than the Chew. The Chew has more impact, and I prefer it in general. But as an objective standpoint, I will go for the Zero in the bass performance. It also sounds more natural. Like in the orchestral passages, you have those huge, gigantic drums, um, and those just sound more realistic with the Zero, despite the less bass quantity in comparison to the two. So yeah, bass goes ultimately to the Zero. Mid bass, on the other hand, the Zero, I wish it had just slightly less mid bass, because the Chew sounds slightly more separated from the going from the bass to the mid range. So in those terms, I think that the Zero is just slightly too warm in that area, and it could benefit from like 1.5 decibels down in that zone. Going into the mid-range, both of them follow completely different approaches in the mid-range. Like tuning-wise, they sound very similar, but if you listen closely, timbre is completely different. Vocalists are pushed back in the Zero, while they're forwards and kind of brighter and less natural on the Chew. So that entirely depends on your preference. Me personally, I will go for the Chew because it's just a slightly more bright presentation. It puts everything a bit more into the front rather than blending the instruments in, which for me just is a plus. But it's just personal preference, so I will take my advice as a grain of salt. And the Zero has better timbre in the mid range. It has slightly better vocal performance, just in terms of timbre, but they're also slightly pushed back. So for those of you who prefer a very forward, very intimate performance in terms of vocals, the I think that the Chew fares slightly better in terms of that. And that might also imply that the 7K region is helping out in pulling the upper mid range up and helping those female vocals expressing themselves slightly better rather than being pushed into the back of the room with the other instruments. The zero fares better for huge compositions, for chores, and those massive passages. While they are better controlled in the two because the driver is just straight up faster, I think that the zero just is more engaging and has a better sense of scaling. Some instruments really do sound grand, huge, massive, such as the piano on and the violins on Hans Zimmer Mountains. That song is specifically designed for volume scaling, and I think the Chew doesn't really do it justice. While the Zero just fares better in that regard. The Chew, though, on chill hop music, EDM, rock. I wouldn't say rock sounds better on the Chew. I'll also say that metal doesn't sound better on the Chew because it just gets a bit too strident. But everything else, I will go for the Chew personally. Because while it has that slightly more metallic timbre, it sounds clearer. It sounds apparently more detailed. While I would say that both the Zero and the Chew in the mid-range performance, they're similarly detailed. Like in some songs, I could pick some particular details with the Zero, while on others, I wouldn't do that with like Zero wouldn't just portray them, while the Chew, which has an upper end in terms of upper mid-range to treble performance, I will actually hear them more. So just depends on your preference. You like a slightly more warm presentation, a slightly more relaxed, more romantic. Some will say more musical. I will refrain from using that term because it really doesn't mean anything. But these just sound better in terms of timbre, and the Chew has more clarity. Now, treble. Treble is an area where I will describe the Chew as problematic sometimes. If you feed them a good recorded songs, like the Yoko Kanno OST from Cowboy Bebop, that shit is supremely well recorded, and then I will go for the Chew. But if you have songs that are, I wouldn't say poorly mastered, but just okay in terms of recording quality, I will stick with Zero because the Zero isn't as picky in terms of recording quality, and the Chew just benefits from higher recording, quality. And that's what I think sets these two apart the most. Aside from, we're going to get into the soundstage later. The Chew wants good recordings, while the Zero just accepts anything that you fit it. Well, both of them are neutral. I think that the warm tone of the Zero kind of blends every instrument in, so it doesn't sound as separated, and for that, I think that the Chew can unveil more errors in the recording than the Zero can do. While both of them are similarly detailed in the bass and the mid-range performance, I think that the Chew just pushes the treble just enough that it isn't bothering me too much, but at the same time, well, it can be troublesome. It just unveils every tiny little detail. We are of course talking about $20 IMs. I'm not saying that these compete to the huge offerings at the $100 or $130 price bracket. The Z12 or the S12 would absolutely demolish these in terms of pure detail performance. But just in this case, these punch way above their weight class for being like a $20 AM. I will gladly compare these to the $50 offerings, and I will even say that both the Zero and the Chew are a generally better performing IM than the Moondrop, how was it called? The Starfield or the Aria. Because, well, the Aria and the Starfield have slightly better technical performance. I generally would imply that the Zero and the True have better tuning because it's following a more general neutral response rather than the pure Harman 2019 response that both the Aria and the Starfield follows. Now, consider that um, the Aria came out in 2020 and the Moondrop Starfield came out in 2019. So those are older IMs, but that's just to show how far we've come in terms of companies listening to their customers and getting their hands on products that they may have received some negative feedback on, some critiques, and improving upon those. So both 7 Hertz and Moondrop are doing that. They're listening and actively talking to the community, which is basically their end goal, and that is wonderful in my opinion. And we're moving so fast thanks to that. So now, just to wrap it up, let's talk about imaging, soundstage, realism, etc., etc. Soundstage is better on the Chew in terms of width, but I wouldn't go as far as to say that they're too different in that category, because um, both of them really don't have that huge of a sense of soundstage, and that's where these come in. We're going to talk about these in another review, spoilers. But generally, both the Zero and the Chew have moderate soundstage, with the Chew having just a bit more expansive width. So, as maybe I will show it, like the Zero is right here between your ears, and the Chew just goes like this, adds like 2 centimeters max width that can be reached by the instruments. Well, depth isn't really all that different, and it just kind of stays within my face. And yeah, that's about it for soundstage. They don't really have any sense of height, because you can't expect much from technical performance there, but they're relatively good on their own. Now, the imaging is very good on the Chew. It's impressive, so much that it can almost compete face to face with the Moondrop Starfield, which was the king of imaging for a single dynamic driver IM in that price range, uh, at least in 2020, until the Aria came out and outclassed it. The Zero has slightly worse imaging performance, but that kind of goes with its tuning and its replay style, which is more of a warm tuning, and while the Chew just goes an extra notch in giving you that sense of separation with a slightly better imaging. Realism is better on the Chew, but if you're listening to classical music, it's better on the Zero, because just straight up has better timbre than the Chew, which sounds metallic sometimes. So, just to wrap it up, I think that personally, I will still go with the Chew. But as many of you will know, most people are going to prefer the Zero, because it has a slightly more mainstream sound in just the fact that it doesn't have the 7K bump that the Chew has. So it sounds slightly more relaxed, more toned down, and it's better for long listening sessions. While the Chew is highly energetic, it's just clearer and brighter, and it puts everything to the front. And I will go for that for shorter listening sessions. Actually, I think you could buy both and enjoy them both because they present music in different enough ways that you will have both and enjoy them at different times. And that's my advice for you. So overall, also for the comfort's sake, I will still go with the shoe because these have a weirder shape. They're bigger. They're not as secure as the shoe. I have to adjust them every 10 minutes or so. And I could wear these for maximum 45 minutes if I'm being honest. Well, the shoe, I could go on for a 2 hour straight ride on train or a car. I wouldn't just have any kind of trouble with comfort. But as you may know, we're going to get into the Cascade C75 review, and I'm going to state these are the most fucking comfortable thing I've ever had. I'm so excited about them, much more than I am with Zero, because these are the love of my life. Jesus Christ, I didn't have such beautiful performance in years since the HD 600 came in. Holy moly, fucking $25. Oh my god. But well, that's it. We're going to see you in the next review. So that's it. Goodbye.